Hi everybody, and welcome to this video which covers the basics of psychology. This is for the new Stage 1 Psychology course as part of the science inquiry skills that you need to know. So let's get started. Alright, so the basics of psychology starts with the definition at Year 11 level. So it's defined as the systematic study of thoughts, feelings and behaviour and the factors that influence these. So we look at all three of these concepts of psychology, so obviously thoughts, feelings and behaviour, and we also need to consider the factors which influence all three of those aspects. Now there's actually many different definitions of psychology. This is the only one you need to worry about for Year 11 level, but because no two people are the same, there's actually several definitions of psychology depending on the specialist area of psychology. But that is just the general definition that you need to know at Year 11 level. It is systematic because there is a systematic process or a system that we follow, in other words, when it comes to our experiments and our investigations. It's also important to remember that psychology is a science. So we gain empirical evidence, we do experiments, we collect data, we analyse and interpret that data and publish our results, just like any other science. The only difference is that we obviously are working with people and animals. But it is a science because it follows the scientific method. So in Stage 1 Psychology for the new course, we mainly focus on behaviour. So we've looked at the biopsychosocial model, and we also look at the other extraneous variables that we've talked about that may influence results in terms of behaviour and in terms of results. So this page here is basically the golden rules of psychology and the very basics that we started off with. So looking further into that, we also looked at the definition of behaviour because that's our main focus. So that is defined as any observable action, in other words, to be seen or that's able to be observed, that's made by a living person or an animal. So we need to be able to observe it. If we cannot observe it, it's not a behaviour. It's classed as a thought or a feeling. So when we went through it in class and I asked you all, how does behaviour differ from thoughts and feelings? The answer to that is we can obviously observe behaviour. We cannot necessarily observe thoughts and feelings unless there are behaviours that show the thoughts and feelings of that individual. So if we can't directly observe it, it is classed as a thought or a feeling. But if we can observe it, it's a behaviour. Even if it's an involuntary behaviour, so for example, fainting or coughing or blinking, if we can see it, it's a behaviour, whether it's voluntary or not. Now, the difference between psychiatry and psychology in Australia, a lot of people assume that they're the same thing, but they're actually not. So it's two different qualifications and there's two different ways that people can go about studying either discipline at university and beyond. So psychology or psychologists are trained in many different aspects of psychology. We'll look at that in a minute. So there's a lot of different areas and a lot of different special areas that psychologists can get into. In Australia, psychologists are not able to prescribe medication. So that's actually not part of their qualification, so they're unable to do that. And psychologists focus on specific behaviour problems or symptoms. So a psychologist would very much be focused on behavioural problems and or symptoms that a client or a patient is showing, whereas a psychiatrist is a medical practitioner, so they do part of a medicine degree as part of their qualification. They mainly focus more so on the biology of psychological disorders. So, psychological disorders that have a very, very heavy biological focus is what they would focus on. A very good example is schizophrenia. That is a very biologically heavy disorder. So a psychiatrist would be able, therefore, to prescribe medication because they've done part of their medicine degree. The part of the degree that they study is prescription medications, so they can actually prescribe medications to their clients, especially if it is a very biological disorder that's causing the psychological effects, whereas a psychologist doesn't do that. So they focus on behaviour problems, psychiatrists focus on biological problems that lead to psychology disorders or as a result has a psychological issue because of the biology going on in the brain. Now, like I said before, there's different types of psychologists. There's many different areas. This is certainly not all of them, but these are the most common. So there's counselling psychologists, educational psychologists, Organizational psychologists, that's becoming more and more popular. So that's big organizations hiring psychologists in order to look at the psychology of consumerism and increasing profit. There's also community psychologists, sports psychologists, very, very, very popular, especially in Australia. Health psychologists working in hospitals and so on. A clinical psychologist is, for lack of a better term, like your typical psychologist that deals with a lot of cases of anxiety and depression. So, yeah, clinical psychologist deals with more, I hate this word, but more common mental disorders because of their diagnoses, right? So anxiety and depression. Vocational psychologists, academic psychologists that work at universities, and forensic psychologists, so that work with the police department and work in the prison system. So that is the basics of psychology. So I hope you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in class or send me an email. Otherwise, happy studying. Bye.